Okay, so in my old school, people used to read a lot of, generally conservative newspapers because it's a conservative area. They used to just read a lot of newspapers. And, I'd read them with them, and eventually I stopped reading a lot of the newspapers that they were reading because I found out about a lot of the problems in the way news is reported. So, an example would be, about this time last year, the CIA issued a statement saying that they just killed 3 Al-Qaeda affiliates in a drone strike. All well and good, until the Guardian gets a tip and follows up the story and finds out that no Al-Qaeda affiliates were actually killed, but just 3 farmers were killed in this drone strike while they were farming their sheep. And one of these farmers was actually a 13-year-old boy who had suffering from night terrors after his brother and his father had died in drone strikes in the months before. And then just a drone comes out of the sky and incinerates him and turns him into charred bones and a pile of ash. So I found out about this and I tried to see, well, who else has reported this? And I couldn't find anyone. No other single major news source that I could find, apart from The Guardian, reported on the fact that the CIA had just killed an innocent child. And it's not even an American news source, even though this is American news. So, it became pretty clear to me that a lot of things just aren't reported well. So about the same time last year, I started talking to my old house parent, who's a very political person, and he told me about what he called the 5 obstacles in journalism and media. And they were ownership, advertising, sourcing, FLAC, and anti-terrorism and fear. And he just explained to me very quickly what they were and how they worked, and then told me to go and find my own examples. So ownership is obvious, it costs money to start and run and publish a newspaper. So then the people who have money do it, and the people who have money, the rich people, then have complete control over the newspapers. And this is often the case. And the group of people who do control the media you consume, whether it's news shows or websites or papers, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And a way that this can go wrong can be shown through Rupert Murdoch. This guy is worth upwards of $15 billion, owns over 80 companies, including The Times, which is one of the most respected conservative newspapers in this country, The Sun, the second most read newspaper in Britain as well, and Fox News. A few months ago it claimed that the entirety of Birmingham, all 1 million people in Birmingham, were Muslim and that there were no-go zones in the city because it was under Sharia law. I think that we've all figured out that that story is just wrong. So, this guy has an enormous amount of power, has demonstrated that he's willing to lie to people for whatever purpose, for whatever reason he chooses then. And he's just, it doesn't make sense how he's just allowed to keep this much control over things. Anyway, so the next obstacle is then advertising. To get this, you need to know where newspapers make most of their money, and that is in advertisements. They don't get much from the amount you pay to buy it or the amount you pay to the TV services. They mostly get it from selling prime advertising spots. Which means that in a financial sense, these papers and shows aren't really selling news. They're selling advertising spots to the advertisers, and then they just get the news as bait for you to come in and watch the advertisements. Which means that news somehow becomes devalued, which is why you sometimes get some very strange news articles like 10 ways to blow his mind in bed. The second problem with this is not just that news is valueless and that you get just bad stories, but also that suddenly the newspapers, which get so much money from the advertisers and need them to survive, they can't afford to lose advertisers all the time, which means that if there's somebody who supports them, they find out they're doing something bad which they should criticize, they can't. They're just not in a position to be able to do that and survive. So that's a pretty clear problem. This obstacle can be sometimes really much stronger than you'd expect, or sometimes much weaker. So some newspapers aren't affected by it at all pretty much, like The Guardian again, which is big enough that it can insult whoever it wants and it just gets somebody else. Sourcing is mainly a logistical problem. You can't have reporters everywhere reporting on everything, like in rural Yemen and the DRC. It's just not possible. And because newspapers need reliable, consistent news, they need to go to places where they can keep on finding more and more news each day. So where does news usually come from? Well, I don't know, the White House, the Kremlin, or 10 Downing Street, or usually places of politics and business. These places work through spokespeople who speak to the reporters, who then just tell you the official party line. The White House won't say that it's obviously just been good, that it killed a bunch of innocent people by accident or on purpose in Yemen. It will say that it killed Al-Qaeda affiliates, because that sounds much better for it. So that's okay, because usually the official party line then has got decent evidence behind it and it's fine. But then sometimes, the problem with this is that reporters then have to rely on these spokespeople. So if you start just complaining about everything that you're told, then you may get a bad relationship with the spokesperson and they won't talk to you. Which as a journalist is suicide, because if you don't get talked to, then you have no news, so then you just get fired because you're not producing anything anymore. So again, you have this problem that you need to stick to the official party line then, and that there's a lot of bias in the way it's reported. There are a lot of things getting in the way of being able to tell the truth, even when contrary evidence turns up, like in the case of the incinerated child. FLAC is just a fancy way of saying the word complaints. And there are lots of ways to complain. You can just stop reading the paper or watching the show. You can write letters asking for formal apologies. You can start rallies. You can do lawsuits. And this can often be a huge problem for newspapers, for media companies, because they need to somehow accept that people will have problems with what they say, and they need to deal with the fallout that can come from it. That's usually okay. It's not usually such a big deal until you come to the formation of what's called FLAC machines. And these are just organizations which are there, and they only exist to produce FLAC. They only exist to complain and take down news stories. So an example is a global climate coalition, which is run by companies like Exxon and Ford, which just have like massive interest in fossil fuels, and it's there to promote the interests of climate research. And what it actually does is just discredit most climate scientists, saying, oh yeah, but there's this bit of evidence which says that climate change doesn't happen, even though there's much more evidence which says it does. And they also do it to like show how environmentally friendly they are. Which is fun when you start looking at pictures of oil spills. And then you have anti-terror and fear, which I think is best explained through France since the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Because after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, you had millions of people walking through the streets of Paris promoting free speech, saying how it's such a great thing, how we should have free speech forever. And yet, at the same time, prosecutors in France were told to start cracking down, among other things, on anti-Semitism, on anything which is abusive to Jewish people, even though the Charlie Hebdo attacks had been sparked by something which was abusive to Muslim people, under some perspectives. And following this, recently, a few months back, 12 people were arrested and fined for going into a shop with t-shirts saying we should boycott Israeli goods because of what they're doing in Gaza. And they appeal to the highest appeals court in France, and they get rejected because it's anti-Semitic, because it's supposedly attacking Israel, and that's just not allowed. And also, especially since the November shootings as well, there was a 12-day state of emergency declared on the day that the November shootings occurred. Those 12 days in January have somehow not yet elapsed. And with those emergency powers that the state then got from these, police have begun doing raids without warrants. They raided a halal shop for no reason that anybody can figure out. They've been shutting down mosques. They've just been doing things which have been criticized by human rights leagues. And nobody hears about this. It's not reported in the media much. It's very, very rare that you hear anything of this. But what is reported is ideas about subways being closed, about terrorist threats from in London, about 2 women being raped by refugees in Cologne. And hearing not about the problems that we cause and are crushing free speech in response to this, but only hearing about the problems gives a lot of people a sense of fear. They're very afraid. And because they're so afraid, they don't even bat an eyelid when a mosque gets shut down and a halal shop gets raided and nobody knows why. They don't care. Because they're afraid, they're allowed to have these simple civil liberties to be taken away from them. I mean, hopefully after this you'll just go out and you'll look at your own news sources and you'll look for examples of where this happens within them, because these are very, very common problems and some of them are impossible to overcome. Sourcing isn't really something you can find a way around, for instance. But the main point of this whole thing is that around you, there are often systems which are massive and they have a huge impact on your life. The way democracy works in your country, the way capitalism works, many, many things. And they often have massive flaws which you simply cannot see on your own. I could never have found this on my own if I hadn't been told it by other people. So what you want to do is you want to try and look for these things. You want to try and look for the problems in these systems so that you can find a way to combat them in your own life, and then try and tell other people about them so that they can do the same. So that hopefully we don't always believe every statement the CIA gives us, but we don't always forget about children being incinerated. Thank you.